I was 5 years old, I got interested in weather because of a tornado that went through my neighborhood and killed 44 people and destroyed my kindergarten.
531 were injured that day. That was May 20th, 1957. Mike was living in Ruskin Heights, Missouri at the time. That tornado was retroactively rated an F5. The Fujita scale that we use to rate the wind speeds of a tornado today hadn't been developed yet. That storm was the first time a National Weather Service meteorologist issued a tornado warning, which Mike says saved hundreds of lives that day. Up to that point, no one had been allowed to do that for fear it would cause mass panic.
When I tell people that 60 years ago today there was no such thing as a tornado warning, they're going, what? Huh? That doesn't make any sense. In the 1880s, a man by the name of Willis Moore became the head of the Weather Bureau, the name then of today's National Weather Service. And he had a fear, and today I think we call it a phobia, of being wrong about hurricanes and tornadoes. So his solution to make sure they were never wrong was to never forecast any. And for that reason, the Galveston hurricane, even though the Cuban Weather Service had forecast it would move toward Texas,
which was never heard by the American public. The Weather Service blocked the telegraph lines that day. Because of that, 8,000 people were killed when the hurricane hit without warning. Sadly, that's a scenario that would be repeated again and again. When the Woodward, Oklahoma tornado hit without warning in 1947, 181 people were killed.
There were 3 separate tornadoes in 1953. One that hit Waco, Texas, that killed 114. The next hit Flint, Michigan, that killed 115. And the next day, Worcester, Massachusetts, 94.
102 were killed when a tornado touched down in Blackwell, Oklahoma, and Udall, Kansas in May of 1955. Finally, a brave man came along who risked his job to change that.
A man by the name of Joe Ogsley, who worked with the Weather Bureau in Kansas City and who had been the Navy's meteorologist at Okinawa and Iwo Jima, felt he had a moral obligation to his fellow citizens to warn of this tornado that approached Ruskin Heights, and he did. And the ban on tornado warnings crumbled overnight.
Because of that warning, Mike says his family went to the basement for the very first time.
Normally, we can expect about 180 tornadoes each year in the United States.
Mike says he knew from that moment on he wanted to devote his life to studying whatever it was that had done all that damage. Soon after that, Mike started his very first business.
And it seems that in that era, every young man who was interested in weather had a backyard weather station.
That backyard weather station soon turned into a weather club, which then led to his first professional weather job. At the tender age of 17, he found himself working for a major broadcasting company.
KMBZ Radio in Kansas City, which was then the #1 rated radio station in town, heard about us, and we started doing drive time weather for KMBZ.
After a few years of doing that, Mike decided to go to the University of Oklahoma to study meteorology. While there, Mike got another huge break. Just after finishing his freshman year, he applied for a job at WKY-TV in Oklahoma City, and he got the job. After graduating from OU, Mike came to Wichita, where he was hired to be the chief meteorologist for a local TV station. If you were here in 1975, you probably remember seeing him on the air. In 1979, Mike left to work at another TV station, this time in St. Louis, but ultimately came back to Wichita to start his own company. Weather Data is dedicated to keeping people and property out of the path of a storm. At that time, he was a ripe old age of 29.
So yes, I've been at this a very long time. This is the software that our meteorologists use when they issue storm warnings for our clients. And what I'm going to do, I hope here, is zoom in on the Dallas area. Whoops, zoomed in too much. This new software is so fast. And this myriad of colors and spaghetti lines and all of that represent our clients.
Weather Data has become a multi-million-dollar corporation, but in the beginning, it was pretty bare bones.
At the time we started, there were 3 people, myself and 2 other meteorologists.
Just 3 people who had to cover a 24-hour shift. So how did they do that? by doing whatever it took to make it happen.
Sure, but that's what you do when you're trying to start a business.
Mike's company has certainly grown over the years. It now employs around 30 people and has clients in all 50 states and a number of foreign countries.
We have high winds in Oregon. The remains of the storm that went through Memphis and Nashville and caused all the tornadoes and high winds is now causing winter weather in the Northeast, and that's what these warnings are for.
Companies hire weather data to alert them when hazardous weather puts their employees or their property in danger. It's a business where your decisions truly are life and death.
There have been, in the history of our company, 2 or 3 people who left and said, I cannot deal with the pressure of having to put these warnings out. Because if we issue a tornado warning for, say, the Union Pacific at Greensburg, the trains stop, and it costs the railroad thousands of dollars to stop a train. But if the tornado hits the train, then it's millions of dollars of loss. So there's some pressure either way.
Greensburg is the perfect example of that. This was a computer-generated recreation showing where the trains were stopped.
4307 west, over.
Guys, don't get in too big of a hurry to go westbound. I got a tornado warning around 325, between 325 and milepost 342 until 2200, so about another 35 more minutes. I expect a little bit of a delay there at Wells.
Weather Data's decision not only saved Union Pacific Railroad millions of dollars by keeping the trains and their contents out of harm's way, it made the cleanup afterwards a lot easier, too. Imagine if the cars of these 2 trains, the crew from both trains, and the contents were added to the destruction.
And they found out that one train would have been in the passing siding and another train would have been going through Greensburg at the time of the tornado, but for our warning. Debris was flying through the air at speeds well in excess of 200 miles an hour. And suppose hazardous materials were on one of those trains and got spread. How much more difficult would that have made the cleanup of Greensburg?
We've seen story after story on Greensburg, but Mike says he thinks the media missed the real story.
The Wichita Eagle, the day after, had a large one-word headline, and that headline was devastated. And that one word was accurate. I don't dispute that. But I would have chosen the word miracle. And here's why. If you do a comparison of the Udall and Greensburg tornadoes, the 2 most similar F5, meaning the worst intensity tornadoes, that I believe have ever occurred, and if you had applied the lack of warning that they had in Udall to Greensburg's larger population, you would have lost about 240 people. We actually lost 9 in the city of Greensburg, which means we saved about 230 lives. Now, considering the intensity of that tornado, considering that at least 2 individuals told me it was the first time in their lives they had ever taken shelter, that is a major accomplishment.
Weather Data's clients include some pretty big names: Spirit, Boeing, Cessna, Union Pacific Railroad, IBM, and Ford Motor Company, just to name a few.
If we tell them to take cover, they pretty much take cover. And thousands of dollars of productivity are at stake.
That was especially evident in Mississippi in 2008.
We put out a tornado warning for the Caterpillar plant in Oxford. They moved 88 people into shelter. 22 minutes later, the plant was destroyed by an F3 tornado. So businesses are catching on that weather is an important strategic and competitive tool. And so let's say that the storm is this large and moving straight east across Dallas. Well, what happens is the system automatically picks out what clients are affected.
Mike says weather forecasters often get labeled as buffoons and people who get paid even when they're wrong. But as technology improves, the days of missed forecasts are getting to be fewer and fewer.
Even 10 years ago, we would sometimes really blow winter storms, meaning we'd forecast 2 to 4 inches of snow and nothing at all would fall. It would be partly cloudy the next day. That was because in this part of the country, the separation between no snow and a lot of snow can be very, very narrow, sometimes as little as 20 miles. I've kept track, and for the last 3 winters, we have not blown a winter storm.
So what's made the difference?
That's because of several things. Better computer models from the National Weather Service, the equipping of jumbo jets with weather instruments. So this vast Pacific Ocean to our west that used to have no data now has decent data as a result of all of the airplane reports, and a new generation of weather satellites. All of those are able to sense the weather in areas that we couldn't sense it before. And because of that, we can give a better picture to the computer forecast models to start out with, and if it has a better picture to begin with, it can ultimately make a better forecast.
Mike says most of the advancements that have been made have largely been made by researchers themselves.
How much do you think the average American spends on the entire National Weather Service and all of the weather infrastructure, the radars, the things that measure clouds at airports, the weather satellites? What do you suppose that amount is per person? $2.82. Wow. America essentially spends a Happy Meal on weather. For like every dollar you spend improving weather forecasts, it ripples to like $20 in improved economic output.
Mike says another major deterrent to more accurate forecasting is the fact that the government refuses to share weather information.
For some reason, for more than 50 years, the Federal Aviation Administration has had this mindset that aviation weather forecasts and warnings are somehow special and somehow separate from the warnings that we do on a day-to-day basis.
The FAA is not allowed to use National Weather Service warnings intended for the public. Now, that lack of communication was especially evident in Christmas of 2006 when a tornado was approaching the Daytona airport. TV weathermen were telling people to take cover 20 minutes before the tornado reached the Daytona International Airport, but
the control tower doesn't get that warning. In fact, they're forbidden to get that warning because it's not an aviation weather product.
Putting the lives of all those passengers who pay for those warnings through their taxes in danger.
So you have the control tower people who are in the path of the tornado and want to take shelter, and you have the pilots and the passengers of an airplane who want the data so they don't fly into a tornado.
But they weren't given that information. Luckily, power went out at the airport and the flight was rerouted. The tornado hit that airport at 1:45, the time that airplane would have been taxiing down the runway. Mike says that same scenario could easily happen again if the lines of communication aren't opened.
The FAA has this very strange bureaucratic attitude that they're not responsible to the taxpayers who pay the taxes.
Over the years, Mike has been involved in a lot of firsts, one of which happened while he was working at WKY-TV on June 8, 1974.
It was the first time a tornado was ever broadcast live. I had an idea that if we put a camera out the back door of the TV studio, we could actually catch the tornado, and we did. And the National Weather Service had been hit by the tornado and wasn't able to issue tornado warnings. We were completely on our own. And there was an editorial cartoon in the paper, I still have the original back in my office, commending us for the warnings that we put on the air.